Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Angie Barker Jackson and I am the Vice President for Institutional Advancement here at Berkeley School of Theology. We are so delighted that you have joined today's First Friday Lunch and Learn session. If you haven't already introduced yourself in the chat, we invite you to do that. And remember that no matter where you are or what time it is for you, you may feel free to enjoy your lunch or a snack during this time. That's why we call it Lunch and Learn. This series is sponsored and planned by the Advancement Division, more specifically the Alumni Engagement Office. And much of the advancement team is co-hosting with me today. Hannah Kang, Lauren Ng, and Leah Rochel are all here with me in some supportive role, so I'm grateful for them. Thank you all for doing the work that you do. These Lunch and Learns have been designed with three purposes in mind: learning, connecting, and being. Each month, as you know, features a different topic and a new guest or guests. And our hope is that the topics will stretch and challenge our minds, that we will connect and reconnect with others in the BST network, and that this will be a space of radical belonging. On this first Friday of Pride Month, I am delighted to welcome a lovely group of folks from the BST community and our extended network of friends. I have with me today Reverend Dr. Rick Mixon, BST alum and affiliate faculty, Reverend Lawrence Richardson, a BST doctoral scholar, Ms. Natalie Aho, Director of Development for the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists, also known as AWAB, and Reverend Shavon Walker, BST alum and Minister of Social Media for the Evergreen Baptist Association. Welcome, my friends. I invite you now to introduce yourselves and to tell the audience your entry point for today's conversation, using the terms, labels, and definitions of your choice. Why don't we go in the order in which I introduced you? So, Dr. Mixon, would you go first?
Okay, I'm Rick Mixon. Let's see, I am currently the interim senior minister at Old Cambridge Baptist Church in Cambridge, Mass. And I'm also affiliate professor of pastoral care at BST. And 56 years ago, I graduated from the school. And so my entry point is really the beginning. I wrestled with coming out all through seminary and came out publicly in the fall of 1973, right after I graduated from BST. For many years, I was sort of the leader of American Baptist Concerned, which was kind of the precursor of AWAB. And I currently serve as actually a more emeritus board member of AWAB, so I'm involved with AWAB as well. So kind of the history of the movement is the history of my life. That's my entry point. Is that enough?
That's great, Rick. Thank you so much. Lawrence, would you introduce yourself?
Yes. Good afternoon. I'm Lawrence Richardson. I am currently in Michigan. I'm the Associate Conference Minister for Church Vitality and Transitions for the Michigan Conference of the United Church of Christ. I'm originally from Minnesota, and I find myself in this particular conversation as a transgender person who is also married to a non-binary individual.
Thank you, Lawrence. I'm glad you're here today. Natalie.
Hello. My pronouns are she, her, and I have just celebrated my first anniversary as the development director for AWAB. I was previously at Wake Forest University School of Divinity, and before that, I worked for a long time, it feels like, at the Baptist News Global. So my background is in the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship space. I'm married to a pastor. And I find myself in this conversation as an ally, but also I have 2 children, and at least one of my kids currently identifies as queer.
Thank you, Natalie. So glad you're here today. And Shavon, would you introduce yourself? I'm a little nervous about you being in the car for a few minutes. Shavon may not be able to introduce herself.
Here we
There
go.
we go.
Okay. I was having trouble finding the unmute button. So I am Shavon Walker, and as Angie has pointed out, I am the Minister of Social Media for the Evergreen region. And my entry point into this conversation is a little bit similar to Rick's. I grew up in a conservative Southern Baptist church. So even though I knew I was bisexual, I didn't have the ability to argue for it in that environment. And it wasn't until I went to seminary, became part of a program called the Reformation Project, and learned more about, context and surroundings and interpretation, that I felt comfortable enough to come out and to support, my other queer siblings in their own, understanding of who they were and how their faith. That's my entry point.
Thank you, Shavon. We appreciate that. Oh, thank you all for your introductions. Before we begin in the kind of question and answer panel time, I want to say up front, the panel and I decided together that we are not going to define LGBTQ plus terms today for you, nor are we going to label other people. Instead, the approach that we are taking is to say that we are committed to trusting the testimonies and self-disclosure of others with whom we are in relationship. So we affirm that you are the only one who can testify to your identity and your embodied experience. And we hope for the same respect and dignity to be reciprocated. If you are curious about terminology, what the letters mean, or about the gender and sexuality spectrum, know that we'll be sharing some helpful resources towards the end. And there are places where you can go to read and learn about such things. All right. Okay, panel, let's get started. And I would like to first talk about your experiences in faith communities and your spiritual formation as LGBTQ plus or ally Christians. So if you would share a little bit about that, you might include if you had a spiritual hero, a spiritual leadership role model as you were, your faith was being formed in you. Somebody want to jump in?
I'll bite. So as I mentioned before, I grew up in a conservative Southern Baptist church environment. And I think for me, my turning point was the election where Trump was elected. And then soon on the heels of that, like hot on the heels of that, was the post-nightclub shooting. And I saw my friends, my queer friends, wrestling with this and, thinking to themselves, if our government doesn't even want to intervene, if our state doesn't want to intervene, why are we here? There's no point in existing anymore. And some of them did become suicidal about that, which led me to struggle with my faith, because I was thinking, well, where is God in all of this? Why aren't things happening? Good things happening. Where are the helpers? And then it hit me, wait, I'm the helper. I need to get involved in this somehow. So for my faith formation, that was, like I said, my turning point into realizing, okay, this is a hands-on thing. We can't just sit back and, expect God to do the work. That's why we're here. So it made me understand more about my relationship to God, and it has helped me help others understand, especially the queer folks that I know that were driven away from the church because of who they were. Now there is a way to come back if they want to, if they want to go that route.
Thanks, Shavon.
For me, coming out, of course, is a process, and as I said, I sort of wrestled with being gay all through seminary and through college. I graduated from Columbia University in 1969. While I was graduating, Stonewall was going on downtown, but I wasn't engaged in it in New York, but in Berkeley, by the time I was ready to come out, Bill Johnson was ordained in the UCC as the first openly gay person, ordained in modern times at least. And I was in class with Bill, so I suppose Bill is something of a hero. Um, Inspired me to my own coming out process. I don't know that I had queer I don't know if I have queer heroes, but I know that I know that I was very much influenced by Rod Romney at Lakeshore Avenue Baptist Church, who preached the gospel of inclusiveness. Other people who talked about being inclusive. I felt like it felt safe to me to push the envelope, safe enough at least to push the envelope to say, could could inclusiveness also include queer people? And so we threaded that needle, and yeah.
Thanks, Rick.
Well, for me, I grew up in the Southern Missionary Baptist Church in Minnesota. My family arrived there during the Great Migration from the South to the northern states, and there was a lot of resettling that happened, and of course, bringing tradition, religion, and culture to a new area wasn't easy, I'm sure. And so my church experience growing up was really of a first generation person to be born in the North. And I say it was kind of three cultures because I had the culture at home where it was very much rooted in Southern Black culture. And then the culture outside of in Minnesota, we predominantly white area, went to a predominantly white school, and gifted and talented programs. And so often one of the only people of color in my classes. And so then, of course, one of the only LGBTQ folks. Growing up, there wasn't a lot of talk about sex or sexuality. However, there were some pop figures, pop culture icons that I really did turn to in terms of having the courage to just kind of embrace more of who I am. And certainly the artist formerly known as Prince, as problematic as Michael Jackson was earlier as a kid, that he was really instrumental. And then, of course, who isn't queer, but Oprah Winfrey, because she really embodied kind of the nurturing and the agape love that I thought we would all really, as people, could embody. But when I came out, or was outed rather at 16, my church community and my family, immediate family, rejected me initially. And so for about 5 years, I had no faith community and was really just rooted in my college community. I was the first person in my family to go to college, so it's really great to be a doctoral student here at BST. But to be the first generation in my family to go to college really was an opportunity for me to be connected with folks that had a wider theological lens. And so learning about people like Bishop Carlton Pearson, Bishop Yvette Flunder, Bishop Gene Robinson, those are the more historical figures that allowed me to see examples of people of faith that were also LGBT. And so I didn't come out as transgender until 28 years old. But in terms of the last, 14 years of being out, it really has been a positive experience as I begin to nurture the faith in others as they're beginning to understand who they are and grapple with some of the questions that I did as a youth and young adult.
Thanks, Lawrence. Your authenticity is really beautiful. We appreciate it. Natalie?
Well, yeah, I'm a great Gen Xer, which means I've deconstructed my faith like 3 times as we're supposed to, right?
Only
I grew
3?
up in right. Well,
Yay,
I mean,
Gen X.
I'm not 50 yet, so I still have time for
I
some
know, I
more.
know, I know. Sorry.
I grew up in Texas, and I grew up in what would be considered a moderate Texas church for the time and the place. My pastor wore a bulletproof vest while he was the president of the General Convention of Texas, because he was trying to help keep Baylor University independent from the Southern Baptist takeover. And so those were the kinds of leaders in my life who were taking a stand. Interestingly, theologically, for a Baptist tradition to be free people, the free church, and yet in a place like Texas, where we had our own versions of Matthew Shepard's murder, talking at all about people who identified, as we would have said then, as with homosexuality, was not even allowed, in church. And I definitely had opportunities to experience purity culture and all of its harm and trauma as well. But my husband had a good friend who advised him, you got to get out of Texas. We had met at Baylor, and they said, you've got to go somewhere else. And we ended up at Duke, where he went to Duke Divinity. And in his welcome class in the year 2000, he had to learn LGBTQ plus language. And we both said, whoa, we're not Kansas anymore. What is all of this that we're being taught? And it was wonderful and beautiful and everything that we needed for our faith and our hearts and our spirit. I would say that along the way, people that I've read a lot and admire, like Anne Lamott and Nadia Boltz-Weber, all of the folks we would all list on a library of deconstructing your faith, also opened my eyes to queer theology. And then most recently, serving at Wake Div and being able to be around Gen Z and watching my own, 16-year-old and the way that they approach inclusion of everyone from a whole nother new, beautiful, wonderful place. I really see this next generation leading us all into a new way of practicing all kinds of faith, and in ways that it will influence our own faith formation, and things like, putting glitter in our ashes for Ash Wednesday seems like such a small act of inclusion, but such a profound way of saying that, yeah, we welcome all, but we also affirm all of everyone, and how people find themselves at that moment with the divine.
Angie, can I mention one other person who was really important to me? Probably nobody else will remember, but when I was coming out after in 72, 73, one of the people that was really embracing and supportive was Bill Malcolmson, who was vice president of ABSW back in those days. When I came back from my internship and was coming out to people at the school was really supportive, and Bill in particular, who was also my major professor. So I'm going to give tribute to Bill.
Thanks for that, Rick. That's awesome. And good to know about our institution as well, for those of us that are not the senior states people that you are, Rick. We appreciate you and your not only your institutional knowledge, but just really your openness to talk about your experience. So Lawrence named a little bit as he talked about spiritual and faith experiences. He named some oppressive sorts of experiences as well. And so I'm curious from other panelists, and Lawrence, of course, can feel free to respond and expand his answer. But what experiences have you had with oppression, with hate or violence, and how have you reconciled those negative experiences or integrated them with your own faith and spirituality?
I have an example. With many, and I certainly cannot say all, but with many of my queer siblings, I remember when I was first starting to become an advocate, I had a lot of queer folks ask me, well, why do you want to be part of this movement? Why do you want to be involved? And I'd say, oh, because I'm bisexual and I believe that, all of us deserve to be represented and heard out and et cetera, et cetera. And then they'd ask me again, no, why do you want to be involved? And the underlying statement was, well, you're not a lesbian, you're not, you're not trans, you're not gay. So really, why do you want to be involved? Plus you're married to a man, so you're actually an ally, right? You can just tell us that. It's fine. So after hearing that repeatedly, I got to the point where, and I've said this on my Twitch stream, one of my viewers asked me, well, why is it that you don't tell people that you're bi right off the bat? I'm like, well, first of all, they don't believe me. Second of all, it, to me, does not make much of a difference as far as my ministry is concerned. If I am part of this rainbow, I am going to advocate for you no matter what letter I use. I may have more experience with the rainbow than some people think because they don't believe that I'm bi. And bi erasure is a thing. So I may not say it up front, but if you ask me, I will absolutely tell you where I am. So that has become basically my mode of operations at this point. So dealing with bi erasure, finding a way to do my ministry in spite of it, that's basically been my foundation.
Thank you.
Angie, I don't think I didn't really think about this. I don't think of myself as having been oppressed, although that may be naive or unrealistic. As far as I know, I was the first openly gay Baptist to ever be ordained, and that took 23 years of fighting with primarily the American Baptist churches of the West, now growing healthy churches. And Jim Hopkins, who's here, can share some of that story with me. But I suppose that's oppression. But to me, it's just the fabric of my life. I mean, I made choices to. I mean, you don't necessarily choose your sexuality or your gender, but you choose how to manifest it, I suppose. And I don't know. My life is through composed, it feels like. So I don't think so much in terms of oppression. Have I experienced things? Sure. I can remember one biennial meeting where I shouted down somebody from the other side who said, "Oh, we love the sinner and hate the sin," and I just really pissed me off, and I chewed him out for that. So I mean, I've experienced that kind of thing over the years, but is it oppression? I suppose it's oppressive, but it's just the fabric of life. It's the water we swim in. So
Helpful perspective.
that's my experience.
Yeah.
At least
But I
at
would
this,
definitely say that's I mean, that's violence in one form. I mean,
sure it
that's
is.
verbal violence. Yeah.
Yeah, it isn't that, and I've heard, I've
Yeah.
had people say hateful things to me. But yeah, I mean, maybe it's an advantage of being old that you look back on these things and say, well, it's just the rhythm of life.
Yeah.
To dovetail off of that, I will say, in much of my professional work, that is the case where there are people just with opinions and they get to express them. And sometimes they're really harmful opinions, but they're not necessarily oppressive because they don't impact directly my life
Mm.
day to day. But certainly when I look at, anti-trans laws and legislation that is put forth, those things are oppressive current day. In terms of relational oppressive behaviors or engagements, most of that was growing up as a queer kid and not having any other language, just knowing that I was different, and then having family members to whatever degree, act out of their own ignorance and homophobia and later transphobia. But I think over the last 25, 30 years, much of the family that still remains have really come along to varying degrees of acceptance. Certainly, there's the group that will, be right on spot with certain kinds of language, and then there's the group that refuses to use certain language, but they just know they love you, and that's good enough, right? Because of who they are in my life. And so I find varying degrees of acceptance, but the oppressive forces are usually more systemic at this point in my life.
Well said.
Thank you, Lawrence. That was really lovely. And just thinking about um, loving the people for who they are, whether or not they get all of the language or whatever, right? Just knowing that as individuals that there is deep care and love there. That's really profound. Because sometimes we get stuck, right, with not getting things exactly right, and that gets in the way of our loving other people and they're loving us, quite frankly, sometimes. So thank you for that. Natalie, did you want to share something?
I mean, I feel like I'm the least qualified to answer this question as a cis straight white person. Obviously, as a woman, I experience some oppression, but from my sexuality, no. Other than that, I will say that there was a recent study that came out that folks who were really immersed in the purity culture, which one of the churches I was a part of was one of the groups that traveled to Washington, D.C. in 1994 and put their names on pegs on the White House lawn to say that, they're waiting until marriage. And underneath all of that, of course, is not just the fear of the way that we control women, but also the way that we try to control sexuality. And I read a study recently that there are signs that those of us who were really immersed in that actually have PTSD, and it has affected our own experiences of the way that we understand sex and our relationships to others. I think all of that is tied, though, right? That it's all about how we are able to see love and the way that we connect as humans. What AWAB and this community is teaching me in talking to our churches and our board members and ministers is that we have done so little to address the trauma that the church universal has inflicted on everyone, allies and queer persons. And our next great feat must be figuring out a way that we play a role in the healing and the repair work that needs to be done. And some of that comes from straight folks who are in churches that may have been affirming for 40, 50 years and still need to play a role in recognizing how we can step in the gap for the churches that are doing harm even this second.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's a sermon there. Thank you, Natalie. And it's actually a good segue because one of the things we agreed as a panel is that we wanted to address the issue of creating safe Christian spaces. So why don't we do that for a few minutes? How do we create safe Christian spaces? What is the role of lay persons? Natalie talks about being a lay woman, and a lay leader in her space. There are a lot of, there's a lot of clergy on this call because that's the nature of what we do as an institution, is form clergy persons, but there are others in this space as well. So let's think together about that. How do we create those spaces? How do we support families in our faith spaces? Families who perhaps there are LGBTQ parents, maybe raising straight children, or maybe straight parents raising queer children. What are the ways in which the church can move forward and be healthier and support families as they're growing together? Who has ideas?
It's just a couple of quick things because they're fresh. The churches I've served have all been welcoming and affirming. So maybe that's why I'm haven't felt the oppression so much, because in these later years, that's where I've served. But just a couple of things about where I'm serving now, Cambridge Baptist Church. Sunday's Pride Sunday, and so four of us have created. I invited three of the other queer people in the church to work, younger queer people to work with me in creating the service. So we're doing this wonderful queer this service Sunday. All four of us are preaching on queering our faith. So there are places, and to piggyback on what Natalie was just saying, last Sunday, this visitor came up to me, a young Chinese American who he wanted to know, because we say our mother, our father, and we say the Lord's Prayer, big deal. But he said, well, all this feminist thought. He said, aren't you worried that will turn people off? And I said, there are a lot of churches out there who do traditional stuff, lots of options. It's really important that we have places where we can do it differently and say it differently, and that be okay. And so the work of AWAB in particular, but to encourage all of us to be as intentional as we can possibly be about saying we're inclusive and meaning that we're inclusive and living into an inclusiveness that pushes us to the radical edges. That can be challenging, maybe even a little frightening, but it's essential work. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Thanks, Rick.
I would like to add also, with my work, I get to talk about this a lot, and I believe in universal design. So if we can apply these things to everyone at the base level, it really does create a culture of welcome and inclusion for all. And so just really basically creating spaces where we can share one another's stories and learn from one another. I think a lot of the opportunities that we have for togetherness can build in some of that relational storytelling that increases our awareness of who we have in our pews or in our church systems or in our communities, and then begin to learn about their experiences and how we can be more accommodating or more inclusive with our practices or with our language. And certainly there are, practical things that you can do, like using your pronouns or introducing yourself with your pronouns and asking someone what theirs are instead of assuming them. Things like asking someone what their identifiers are instead of assuming them based on appearance. But also things that would just be more practical in terms of the local church, having one or more of the bathrooms reserved for all genders instead of gendered restrooms. But getting into those kinds of weeds, we can certainly talk about language and our space and making things more inclusive for people with different abilities, but also different identities. And so, for me, it's about listening to who we have in our communities and really building spaces that accommodate the lived experiences of all of those people.
Thank you, Lawrence. Really, really good suggestions there.
If you don't mind, I have one last
course.
suggestion to throw in there. I would say at the very least, if you are going to say that your space is a safer space, maintain those boundaries. For some of us, it can be a little difficult to, I won't say maintain the boundaries, but to practice what we preach, especially if you're dealing with someone who is overly aggressive. But keeping the safety of your community should be paramount. And to do that, you have to say, okay, no, we are not going to accept this type of behavior here. No, we are not going to allow this train of thought to continue. We are going to do this. We have said we are going to do this, so we are going to do what we said we are going to do and hold the line. That's really important, in my opinion.
Thank you. Integrity and boundaries. Thanks, Shavon.
I want to piggyback off of what Shavon was saying. While I know I still have a long way to go, one of the things that I've learned in my anti-racism work is that as a white person, I have to be ready to put my life, my body, myself on the line in spaces because I have the privilege to walk into those spaces first. And the same is true as a straight person, as a cis person, that maybe I don't want to have Thanksgiving with my homophobic uncle, but I'm the only person that can walk into that space and be the advocate, the ally, to put myself on the line, to put my body on the line, to put my emotions on the line. And so the more that I can look for and be aware of, and as Lawrence is saying, learn stories so that I have that much more knowledge of where the oppression is happening, where the microaggressions are happening, and then recognize the times when I am the one with the privilege in the room so that I can help stop those things from happening. It comes back to the education I can do on me so that I can then be the one making those sacrifices to help spaces to be safe. And that is hard because I'd rather just leave those, high school homophobic friends behind. But, maybe I'm the one that they'll remember something that was said and they'll come back to, and that'll somehow change their heart.
That's really helpful.
And I kind of want to piggyback off that.
Lots of piggybacking here.
Lots of piggybacking. There's been a meme going around Facebook, I think, for the last couple of years that says something along the lines of, when you are having a dispute with someone online, and you know perfectly well you're not going to change their minds, what your goal should be is not to change their mind. Your goal should be arguing for the people who are watching the conversation, even if they never say anything. So if I am confronting a homophobe and I am, they're trying to throw Bible verses at me and I'm coming right back with this, context and interpretation and so on and so forth, I'm not going to change their mind, which is fine. But the people watching and reading that conversation will probably think to themselves, oh, I didn't think of that. Oh, is that where that comes from? Oh, well, I didn't know that this was the situation with this term. So I've educated them, even though I didn't win the argument. So sometimes that is that's something we need to keep in mind when we're having these combos.
And you've identified yourself as a powerful ally in the moment and revealed yourself to be a safe person for other people who might need someone safe. to talk to. Thank
You
you,
know,
Shavon.
there's an interesting divide here. It seems I'm observing between the importance of sort of defending the space, and the importance of shaping the space, if I can put it in those terms. And they're both really important. And I suppose for me personally, because I'm old, I've fought a good fight and I'm tired of fighting. I don't want to fight anymore. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to fight with you. I'm just going to shake the dust from my feet and move on, because there's so much, for me, there's so much wonderful work to be done in creating the kind of community that is indeed welcoming and affirming, and where people can come and feel both safe, but also not just safe, but also encouraged, embraced, to live their best lives. So in these last years of my life, that's what I want to do. I don't want to fight with you anymore. So, and doesn't mean I might not have to, but I don't want to. So anyway, that was just an interesting observation.
I wanted to add on to that too. I'm sorry, Angie, I keep jumping up with this.
You're fine.
Once we get going, it's hard.
There's another meme that's been going around Facebook, and they call
All
it
the
all the memes. They call it the parable of the choir. So they point out that the reason, when you hear a choir perform and they have this note that they hold for what seems like an impossible length of time, it is not everyone singing all at once. There are people who are singing and then they have to drop out to take a breath. And then other people are singing to carry it on, and that's kind of how I see this whole thing. Rick has been singing for a long time, and it's time for him to take a breath. And that's okay. He's tired. He wants to take a breath. It's fine. And that's where people like me come in. This is where, other people in the community and allies and everyone else comes in. We're there to take up that slack, so he does not have to worry about the movement if he takes a break. So just throwing that out there. I'm right behind you, Rick.
It's called staggered breathing. As an old choir singer, it's called staggered breathing. And yeah, it's in that I don't want to work, but I get to do different work.
That's awesome. Perfect. So as we think kind of about our last question, and we'll see what kind of time is left after that. It is Pride Month. And for those of us who are cisgendered straight folks that consider ourselves out and proud allies, what's the best way for us to demonstrate our allyship, both in Pride Month and all year long? Who wants to tackle that?
I do want to echo that there's a reason why, that the word is pride. And I think, I don't know, it's like, oh, we've been saying it for so long. Have we forgotten where the roots are in saying that this is about celebration? And I think the more that we can do to find these opportunities to celebrate, and I think about what does that look like in church? We just AWAB just had our most recent newsletter article come out, and the front page was a story about a church in Williamsburg, Virginia, that decided to figure out how to do a renaming blessing ceremony as a part of the church's traditions and processes for someone who has transitioned. Where are the ways that we can celebrate the sacredness and beauty of every individual? And that, requires our creativity and our joy and our engagement, but we do this together as community, which means you've got to know a lot of people. So make friends.
In in Queering Black Churches, Dismantling Heteronormativity in African American Congregations by Brandon Thomas Crowley. He talks about how he is having this conversation with not the churches who need to be convinced, but with the churches who definitely want some help and want a way to be more inclusive, who want to do the work. And so I say just start with wanting it and really just listening to other narratives and getting to know as many different narratives as possible and understand that the learning is a process and you're not going to get it right or all right. And one of the things that he mentions in this book, and it's specifically for African American congregations, however, I believe that lessons can be extracted for really all people in communities when you think about really creating a process that allows for study of a group of people and hearing and including different voices like we're doing today, making space for new learnings, and then really seeing what kinds of things you can do to celebrate the individual people in your spaces, because everyone's story certainly is different. But I just think really starting with the want, the desire to get to know folks and to really become more welcoming and supportive, and then learning as much as you can about the different people in your community, especially the LGBTQ folks. Lastly, I'll say, getting to know what laws and legislation is currently being enacted or being up for debate in your area, and really leaning on those elected officials to make sure that the policies and procedures that we are voting for really do protect the civil rights of all people.
Thank you, Lawrence. Those are awesome.
And so Natalie doesn't have to do the commercial. I'll say, get involved with AWAB, the Association of Welcoming for Affirming Baptists, now in our 51st year. Are providing really some amazing resources, wonderful resources. I know we have some to share, but in the A website, there's a lot. We're growing by leaps and bounds, half a dozen new churches every time we meet. Natalie put in the chat, but Lawrence, we're Old Cambridge Baptist Church, where I am, is hosting the AWAB board retreat in September, and the third annual AWAB lecture. And the lecturer will be Dr. Crowley, who's a Harvard professor and also pastors a church just up the street from me. So there's a lot in my theme of underscoring the positive. There's a lot of wonderful, wonderful resource out there, and a lot of it you can get through AWAB if you're Baptist. So come along and join us.
Thanks, Rick. Leah, would you go ahead and put the link in the chat to the resources that we've compiled? So Leah just shared a downloadable document with you, and it is filled with both web links as well as like print resources that have links to the places where you can purchase them if you'd like. But anyway, this is a great document, and some of the resources have been mentioned in our talking time today, but there's a lot of exploring that you could do through that resource sheet. So I want to thank the panel for help putting that resource sheet together for you all. Does anyone on the panel want to have one last word, or is there anything that's been left unsaid among the panelists before we draw our time to a close and begin to do announcements and such?
Angie, one other resource I wanted to mention is this, as I said, this is the 51st year of AB Concerned AWAB, but we have a written history of AWAB that's coming out. It should be out, we hope in the fall, right? We're shooting for the fall. So there's a whole 6-chapter book on the history of AWAB, which would be a wonderful resource, historical and ecclesiological, theological.
Thank you, Rick. Shavon, I see you've got a resource in your hand you want to show.
I completely forgot to add this to our list, but this book is Queer, a graphic history, and it's a breakdown of a lot of the history of being queer in the US. As you can see, it is indeed graphic format, lots of pictures and text, very easy to read. And in particular, if you are confused about terminology and where does which group stand under the umbrella of queer, this book can explain it. So I strongly, strongly recommend this as an entry point for anyone.
Thank you. Those are fabulous words about resources. Of friends on the panel, Rick, Natalie, Shavon, Lawrence, I am just overjoyed and delighted that you would spend this hour with us today, that you have, authentically shared yourself and trusted all of us with your stories and your experiences. And it's just been lovely to be in conversation with you. So thank you so much for being here today. It's been a really rich session, and I appreciate it. Before we log off, as always, we have a couple of announcements from Berkeley School of Theology. The first one, especially for those of you that are faithful First Friday attendees, there will not be a First Friday Lunch and Learn in July. It is Friday the 5th, and we know that you all will be taking a long holiday and lighting firecrackers and eating hot dogs and all the things that we do. So take a break in July, but we will be back in August on Friday, August 2nd. Leah is getting ready to share the August registration link in the chat. It's not on the website yet, but this is a direct link to the registration if you'd like to register before it's on the website. The Reverend Dr. Sand Wright Riggins, who is a BST alum and an affiliate faculty member, in addition to being a longtime leader within American Baptist Churches USA at both local and national levels. He will be our guest, and he will be offering a preview of his fall course entitled Lessons from James Baldwin: Life, Love, Lies, and Liberation. It will be a great time. So we hope that you all will join us on Friday, August 2nd for the Lunch and Learn. And then the final announcement I have today is that if you know someone who needs or is seeking theological education, please refer them to BST. We host monthly information sessions on Zoom, and our amazing admissions staff would be delighted to speak with prospective students. Director of Admissions, Leah Rochel, is here in the room, and she's going to put in the chat our registration link for Tuesday, June 11th. That is this coming Tuesday, where we will have an alumni panel present to take questions from prospective students. So feel free to share that in your networks with others. Finally, I just want to thank you all again, those of you who attended to learn out of your own curiosity, and the ways in which you were present for these panelists today. It's been a beautiful time, and I look forward to seeing you all again later in the summer in August. Have a beautiful afternoon and a great weekend.